Hello and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown and I'm the editor at Guns on Pegs. I'm joined as usual by the CEO of ITAP Group, Chris Horn. Greetings, Chris.
Howdy, George. How are we doing? Cooking in your Hampshire barn?
It's pretty warm. It's been some lovely weather, but actually we had a pretty decent drop of rain on Sunday afternoon, which is great because the cover crops went in on the farm at the beginning of last week, and I think if they hadn't had any rain, they'd have been in trouble.
Yeah,
so it's quite nice.
It did mean the covers came out on the cricket, though, didn't it? Do you see what I did there?
Yeah, very good. Yes, it was a fairly intense moment. I'd never been so happy to see a day's play called off. It was.
We were about to lose all the wickets at once, weren't we? We got away with just two. But you've had a lovely day's fishing. After our last pod, you were heading off with the rest of your drink from the pod in hand to an evening on the test. How did it go?
Oh, it was absolutely magical, actually. It's the Leckford Estate is where we were, just outside Stockbridge. And we got there about 6:30, and there wasn't a huge amount going on when we first got there. So we, wandered down to the bottom of the beat, had a little look at things, a few speculative casts just to kind of warm up the casting muscles. And gradually, this is with my brother, just gradually worked our way up the beat. And after about 45 minutes or so, we just started noticing the odd rise here and there. We'd seen a few mayfly coming off, which is pretty late for mayfly, but there was still a few coming off in dribs and drabs. And I suppose it must have been about 7:30. Things really started picking up. I hooked one, and just as my brother was legging it round from the other side with the net, it took me into the reeds and broke me off. And I thought, shit, I've ruined my only chance. And then just while I was sort of dealing with the resulting tangle from having lost the fish and sort of, untangling the running line from between my legs and all the rest of it, another fish rose right in close to the bank on my side, 10 yards upstream. And my brother had arrived by that point. So he then guided me into the fish, a yard further out and 2 yards further up, this kind of thing. And I must have put 4 or 5 casts over the top of this rise. And I just said, I think it's about time for a change of fly. This one doesn't seem to be working, when a big 2.5 pound trout came up and took the fly. This will probably surprise some people. It was my first proper dry fly on a chalk stream fish.
Really?
Seen it rise, cast to it with what you think it's probably eating, and get the take. And it's a pretty magical experience. And then we spent after that felt that we had earned ourselves half bottle of red wine. So we sat down and drank that, and then spent the next, couple of hours cast until it got dark, basically casting at rising fish and just having an absolute whale of a time. Didn't hook anymore, but it was absolutely fantastic. Just a really wonderful experience.
And in this weather, an evening like that, after the heat's come off the day, it's all looking lush and green. Oh, it's just dreamy, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was noticeable that the fish really turned on once the sun had kind of gone down below the tree line, and the temperature dropped off a bit, and the sun was off the water. It was. Yeah, one of the best evenings of my year so far. I'm going to go as far as saying that. But of course, I'm off to Scotland in a couple of weeks' time, so fingers crossed that they get plenty of rain between now and then and some fish start coming into the systems.
I think you need to cross a lot of fingers.
Yeah.
Let's get on to our guest, because he's been there recently. So I don't think he's going to excite you about your trip, though, so keep going.
Right, so yeah, Chris, go on then. Tell us who's joining us today.
We are joined by a very passionate, very knowledgeable conservationist. His route to this status was not an orthodox one, though. He was born in the industrial West Midlands into a sort of multifamily 3 up, 2 down household. And he talks about this a bit, and I think it's really interesting. We'll come back to it. He spent most of his life working for Birmingham City Council ending his 42-year career as Director of Environment and Community Safety. He then joined the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust it would have been the Game Conservancy back then in 96, and became chairman from 2010 to 2018. He then wrote the very successful book Moorland Matters, which was published in 2021. And he's now chairman of the group that represents all the shooting organisations as one voice, Aim to Sustain. So a really interesting history and a rise to sort of complete stardom in the shooting world as it is. But it's an absolute honour to have you with us today. A huge warm welcome to Ian Coghill.
Thanks, Chris. I didn't actually recognise myself from that description, but if it's going, I'll take it.
It's fascinating. I mean, just quickly. So you've a huge amount in those years. What were the sort of highlight years? Are they the most recent ones for you?
Well, no, it's all been great. I mean, the secret of a happy life is not owning a lot of stuff or being rich. It's being happy with what you've got, being content with what you've got. And I've had a hell of a lot of luck. I mean, to be born in a council house in the industrial West Midlands and finish up hunting a pack of foxhounds 2 days a week, and then running a major department of the biggest local authority in the country, and then chairing a thing as wonderful as GWCT. I mean, that's pretty lucky, and people have been very generous to me, and I've had a tremendous amount of sport, shooting, fishing and hunting and so on.
We're definitely going to get onto that. I can't wait to hear. I imagine you've been involved in all sorts.
Most things. I haven't done indoor hang gliding, but I'm looking forward to an opportunity of that.
But is Chris right that you've just come back from Scotland? Have you been fishing?
Well, no, I went to a river with the intention of fishing. When I got there, which was the Dee, which was desperately, desperately low. The water temperature was way north of 60. If you'd hooked a fish, it would have died. So we went on walks and looked at the scenery, which is a pity because that beat is very good in June normally. If they got water, you're more or less guaranteed.
It's quite worrying.
Well, I think it's the weather. I'm old enough to be able to remember 1976. It's not as bad as that. But the ghillie said he'd never seen it that low. He was a young man, obviously. Everybody's young to me, but, he was a seriously young man. And he said it's not unusual to see it like that in August or getting that way, but to see it in June was scary. But they're getting rain now, so everything passes.
Yeah. So I think they've got a bit more water on the Spey, but are you suggesting that I should be packing my swimming trunks when I head up in a fortnight's time?
No, what I think you should do is consider giving it to an old chap who doesn't mind being disappointed. I mean, I'd hate to think of you young and keen going all that way and having a miserable time. So I'm perfectly happy to sacrifice myself on your behalf. I can send you photographs and so on. That'd be good.
It's very noble of you, very self-sacrificing.
That sort of chap.
It's quite a compelling argument.
Just think of the money you'd save. I mean, you'd save a fortune. Cut your losses now.
He's not wrong.
Well, yeah. But I think, tell me if you agree with this. I think as long as, you can fish safely, by which I mean safely for the fish, it's as much about the process as it is about actually catching them. For me, I think if you can enjoy the process, you'll have a great time, even if you come home having blanked.
Yeah, I think these days we have to be careful about the fish. And the key thing for me with the fish is water temperature. If the water temperature is too high, I just don't fish. Anything over 64, I think you should just go and have a stroll.
What's that in new money?
I don't know. I haven't got a clue. I just do Fahrenheit and Mars and yards.
Okay.
I'm in spite of my boyish good looks, I am actually approaching early middle age, and I don't do new money.
Okay, right. So it's important advice, though. So for everyone else's benefit, 17.7 degrees Celsius. That's warm. That's really warm.
But one of the big issues for salmonid, I think, is this business of heat. I was talking to a chap who did a lot of work in the New Forest on sea trout, because there's historically there's a run of big sea trout into those tiny little forest streams. And he said there's only two sorts of fish in the New Forest, as far as trout are concerned, tiny little ones and great big ones. And when it gets sunny, all the big ones are either under a tree or in a deep hole. Or if it gets really sunny, they're under a tree over a deep hole. They're not anywhere else. And so it is an issue for us. And I think one of the things that is important is tree cover, and weed. The in-stream and bankside vegetation is getting increasingly important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so speaking of coping with warmer weather, Ian, what's that you're drinking?
It is gin and tonic, which is medicinal. I only drink it because Mother always drank it. My mother lived to 94 and had a gin and tonic every night of her life. Sorry, I don't want to get Mum into trouble. She had at least one gin and tonic every night of her life. And I take the view that if it's good enough for Mum, it's good enough for me. She was always proud of me, and following her in the drinking stakes. She was impossible. Mother was amazing. She was impossible to. I never saw her inebriated, not once. There were big, strong, beefy blokes being carried out of the room, and Mother was still just sipping her gin and tonics without a care in the world. So. Very healthy. It's called a tonic, for God's sake. What can be wrong with that?
This is a good point. Do you have a go-to gin?
No, well, I'm pretty Catholic in my taste on gin. Gordon, Hendricks, Tanqueray. So they're the ones I drink most. But any port in a storm, really. I'm not keen on something that tastes like, pineapple or anything. But
I'm with you on that.
It's interesting, the longevity thing. I think it was the Queen Mother used to drink gin and Dubonnet. And I'm not entirely clear what Dubonnet is, to be honest with you, but I'm pretty sure it's alcoholic. And she kept going for a long time, didn't she?
Yeah. Doctors differ and patients die. I was just saying today, we saw a feverfew plant today, and I was just remarking that the medical profession burnt all the witches, or as they were more properly called, the wise women, not because they were consorting with the devil, but because they were presenting a cheap alternative for doctors. So they were quite happy to see the witches burn. And in fact, we nearly lost a whole sort of pharmacopoeia of medicines. And even the tonic, it's quinine, for God's sake, and it enabled us to conquer most of the tropical world because we didn't get diagnosed malaria the same as we used to. So there's an enormous amount of knowledge that we should pick up.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, you spent almost half your career in science. Have we just sort of summarised science in sort of 2 seconds? Which is, it was all right for him, it was all right for her. Let's crack on.
Yeah, well,
that's the scientific method.
Yeah, that's right. Well, science. I mean, I love science, and that's why one of the reasons I love GWCT. GWCT is a wonderful organisation. I was walking. I mean, it's got people in it whose brains are that big that you can warm your hands on them on a cold day. And we were. And my classic example was I was walking behind two of them at a conference, and they were talking, and one of them said to the other one, "And 19thly."
I'd love to hear that conversation.
And the great thing with GWCT is that in the conservation industry, most of the research is done to describe a problem, usually in ever more sort of nerve-jangling detail, largely to justify, in many cases, enormous eye-watering grants to watch whatever it is become extinct. GWCT is a tiny little organisation. It deals with problems and finds solutions, practical solutions, and that's what science should be for. It shouldn't. You do have to have the esoteric stuff, but I just love applied science. I love to see something which actually works on the ground.
I want to come back to this because you're absolutely right. There's too much of the other stuff, which is to justify an argument that already exists or something. George, we'll come back to that later. George, what are you drinking?
Well, as we've sort of touched on before, it's quite warm. And last time I had a fairly surprising chilled Beaujolais. This time round, I've got an entirely unsurprising, altogether now, supermarket lager.
Oh, you're taking the mantle.
Yeah, but it's very nice. It's very cold. I finished one, and I've got another one next to me to hopefully see me through the rest of the recording. If not, I'm going to have to leg it to the fridge halfway through. But yes, it's very nice. Chris, what about you? What have you got?
I've gone for something I've actually had before, which I think could be a first, but it's an absolute winning choice, okay? I've gone for a bit of reminiscing and a bit of excitement generating in one drink, okay?
Oh, okay.
It's a Kerr's gin and Yorkshire tonic. Just under a year ago, in a month from now at the Game Fair, we had our big party, and Yorkshire Tonic supplied the tonic, and Borders Distillery supplied their Kerr's gin. And I'm not sure I've had one since last summer, and it's really tasty, and it's brought it all back. So I hope we're going to be talking about the Game Fair in a bit because it's getting close now. We've got a lot to prepare for.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on. But yes, it's a great drink, that, and although my lasting, is memory quite the right word? My lasting experience of that is the after effects of having had quite a lot of it at the Game Fair last year.
Yeah.
But so I think you're quite a brave man to revisit it. But yeah, well done.
That Yorkshire tonic's good stuff, And talking about the sort of floweriness of some of the things that appear on the market these days, the Yorkshire tonic's very Yorkshire. It's quite straightforward. It's gone back to the traditional nature of it, and I like it. I like what they've
nonsense.
done there. Yeah, I won't even try, but yeah. You're our in-house accent expert.
Excellent. Right. So what we do now, Ian, that we've all got a drink and we're all feeling well-oiled, is we turn to our listener correspondence. And our first listener correspondence segment every time is one that we call Whose Bird Is It Anyway? And we ask our listeners to send in their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas. And we call upon our wisdom, most notably the wisdom of our guests, it should be said, to try and offer some advice to help our listeners solve their conundrums. And we always keep our correspondents anonymous in order to prevent them getting in trouble. And this is particularly important, I think, in this case. So I've decided to call this correspondent Bartholomew, who has written, "My friend and I have been trying to get our partners into shooting for the last few years. My wife is constantly fed up with being left alone on childcare duties as I head out for a day of shooting or beating, while his girlfriend suffers from veganism. We've had a number of days out together as couples. The ladies will stay in on a rainy winter's day, and typically he and I will pop out on his family farm for a few hours or spend the day on my syndicate, only to return looking rather pleased with ourselves, having shot and subsequently hidden pheasants in an outbuilding or car. Tricky to hide when the spaniel shares her boot space with the deceased pheasant. The wags tolerate it, however mine would clearly rather that I parent instead of shoot, and his, as I mentioned, is vegan. The question is regarding our plans to solve this issue. We thought we would tackle this issue head on. We've booked a weekend away to Warwickshire at the end of July. We found a very wag-friendly Airbnb, a beautiful stone building, roll-top baths, Arga, etc. We also thought we might stumble across some local attractions. The Game Fair, for example. Are we in for a hiding, a weekend ruined and shooting banned in our households, or is this plan really as cunning as we're anticipating? Are there any particular do's and don'ts that we should be careful of? Piss poor planning and all that."
It's brave chaps.
I know.
Well, if you're looking for advice about how to deal with people who possess an XY chromosome, I suggest you go to somebody else, because I'm as mystified. I'm as mystified as anybody else. That said, the first thing is I'd never push water uphill, and it's probably a good idea to just live with whatever the tension is. But their strategy, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty sound. The game fair's an enjoyable thing. You don't have to be ready in tooth and claw to enjoy the game fair. They sell stuff. There's lots of nice people there. Everybody has a good time. You've already alluded to the fact that if you go on Chris's stand, you get mainlined bloody gin and tonic, which I was unaware of until he tipped me off. But now the whole world knows. So, we can expect to get there early before the supplies run out. So I'd get them there and get them around, because the thing about shooting that people, vegans, and I know I've had people who are vegetarian and vegan beating on my little shoot. The thing about shooting is not killing things. So on my little shoot, we might shoot, on a good day, might shoot 50 head. So the average, and there's 10 of us. And so the average is 5 actually kill. We start at 10 o'clock in the morning, we finish about 3. So that's 5 hours, and I might, on average, kill 5 pheasants. So that's a pheasant an hour. Sounds quite a lot. But in fact, it takes about 3 seconds, 4 seconds to shoot the pheasant. So it's probable that the actual shooting process takes an infinitesimally small part of the day. So something else is going on. There's something else. If you did that on a clay pigeon day, you'd get out the car, put the gun up, bang, 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 back in the car, and go home again. That's not what's happening. It's a shooting is shooting, apart from even wildfowling, but certainly game shooting, is a community activity in this country. It always has been. It always should be. And so the trick with getting people who aren't interested in shooting involved in it is not to get them shooting, but to get them to care about and like and enjoy the company of the other people there. So I think the game fair is a bloody good place to start. I think they're
here.
Wise beyond their years.
And I also think that, like, as a family day out, the game fair has got to be right up there. For small kids, there's dogs all over the place. You've always got the hounds around. There's all sorts of interesting stuff to watch. There's the falconry displays. There's all kinds of great stuff going on that kids will absolutely adore. And for anybody who's a fan of, the Fairfax and Favours and Showfalls of this world, then there's all sorts of fantastic retail opportunities, as I think we're supposed to call them. What better day out for everyone? There's always something going on. There's loads of interesting characters, shall we say. I always enjoy the chaps in full camo.
The camo tattooed on their heads. I always think that's the real hardcore chaps.
With 2 gun slips and a dog on the lead, as if they're sort of walking to the peg.
That's right.
I see. You see, I think I agree with everything you're both saying. I just think that these guys are taking a big risk because they're kind of duping them into the result of what we're saying is brilliant, but they're doing it without explaining it and hoping that they're going to like it. And when they get slightly duped into it, they might resent it. So I think we've got to be careful here. And I definitely think we need to extend a couple of gin and tonics to these guys and their other halves to try and help them weather the storm, which is, it's not going to go perfectly smoothly, but it could. And if it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, come and find us. We'll do our best to help you out.
Quite right. The only other pitfall they might be aware of, I think, depends on their partners, is they won't be happy if they're caught out wearing the wrong clothes.
Good point.
So they do need to think through how they explain to them what the clothes are. It's difficult for some men because they won't have noticed, what the general run of it. They'll have noticed 1 or 2 pretty girls with short skirts, but they won't have noticed what the general milieu is. So, but they will not be happy if they're wearing something that is blaringly the wrong thing. So they ought to think that through.
What is blaringly the right thing?
I don't know. I'm a man. They need to get some of the women who were married to and related to the men in their shoot and make some consultations.
George, you know what the Game Fair Girl outfit is, don't you?
The Game Fair outfit, it's all entirely dependent on the weather. And the key thing is footwear. If there's rain in the forecast, make sure you're wearing a pair of shoes that you don't mind getting muddy. That goes for everyone. You can dry off, but having wet, muddy feet and ruined shoes is miserable for everyone. So I think that's the main thing. Look at the forecast. Be prepared when it comes to your feet. And if you're doing the full weekend like we are, make sure those shoes are comfortable as well, because I always get home and feel like I can't stand up, having done 4 days upright on your feet. And, particularly if it's hot, which it looks like it's going to be for the foreseeable, it's the ground can be hard.
Tip number 1, take your insoles out of your trainers, your running shoes or whatever you've got. Stick them in your standard loafers or whatever you wear equivalent for the weekend. You won't regret it. It's always a must.
But footwear is very important, and they'll get into serious trouble if their partners have got blisters or they've just wrecked their best shoes. I think you're right.
So George avoided the temptation to describe the Game Fair Girl outfit, which we'll leave for another time, but he knows what I'm talking about.
I'll let the listeners write in with their own descriptions.
Yeah, we'd need to do it without mentioning certain brands, but if you do that, then you've kind of ruined it. So, hey. So good luck to these guys. We do come and say hi. It would be good to see you. I hope at that point that you come along and introduce yourselves, but then sort of let us know immediately how it's going. So what sort of tone we need to lay on for the other halves. I think that would be
how big the measure needs to be.
Exactly. Yeah. But we're going to get on to it in a minute. But we've got the party on the Saturday night, which has only recently been fully confirmed. We're a little bit late to our organisation table this year. We'll come back to that in a minute. So these guys, they've got to come. So we'll put their name down. Bartholomew +3 on the list.
Yeah. Great. So moving on then, people who listened to the previous episode will remember that I promised that we have had, after all my exhortations, a submission of a forgotten drive. For anybody who's coming to this particular series of the podcast fresh, a listener wrote in and suggested that a fun segment might be for people to talk about the drives that they love but no longer exist. And we thought nobody was interested, but it turns out that at least one person thought it was an interesting idea.
We have been inundated with a request.
Yes, exactly. We've been barraged by a letter. And the person who thought it was interesting was Callum, who is already a member of the Order of the Garters. And Callum has written, I thought I'd drop you an email in relation to the Forgotten Drive segment of the podcast. My forgotten drive was called The Doctors at an estate called Westwater, which sadly was sold many years ago for forestry planting. The estate holds many fond memories, as I attended from the young age of 7, and it was there that I learned to beat and shot my first game bird, standing beside the gamekeeper on Keeper's Day. By far my favourite drive was the Doctor's. I always remember the dreaded feeling of being told that it was the next one to be shot, as the beaters all set off for the top. We'd walk for what felt like miles approaching the summit, which would then level off, and you'd think you'd made it, only for the incline to get steeper and take you into the clouds again. Ironically, for it being my favourite drive, I never once got to shoot it. But I remember tall birds coming soaring over, often beating most of the guns. One Keeper's Day I will always remember is when I was aged 9 or 10, standing beside my father as he drew peg 1. As I stood 5 feet away with my over and under cap gun, which I'd received at Christmas to educate myself on gun safety, the birds came screaming over both of us. It was safe to say that despite having a cap gun, I think I had the better ratio for shots to birds when compared to my dad.
That's quite enjoyable, actually. I enjoyed that. It took me back to not necessarily forgotten drives, but shoots that I just haven't been to in years, kind of doing that with my dad. I remember coming out of when I was beating for years and years before I got to shoot. I remember running out the end of the drive. Well, sort of, once it got, I'd kept in line, got to the end, and suddenly I was allowed out, and I'd run towards my dad. Dad, did you get any? Did I send any towards you? That whole feeling. Just so hoping that he would just say yes, and I think he probably just said yes, of course, son. Yeah, definitely. I got one that you sent up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really nice story, and I think I would like to hear more of them. So It doesn't have to be a drive that no longer exists. It could be an entire shoot. It could be, just something from your past that you miss. And I think that's a really nice, wholesome bit of content for the podcast. So do keep them coming if you've got an idea. And don't be shy. Just send them in. And if we think they're rubbish, we won't read them out. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very good.
Right, Chris, unpopular opinions. What have we got?
So we've got an unpopular opinion from someone that George has called Bob. I meant to ask, was there a reason for your Bartholomew?
There was not. I gave up.
You let us down.
I was trying to think of something, but I absolutely blanked.
Okay. So this unpopular opinion from someone called Bob, he has said, we should seriously consider changing our language in order to help future-proof shooting. Notably, would it be sensible for us to consider rebadging the title Gamekeeper to something more in keeping with the breadth of that role in the modern-day shooting arena? The historic connotations of men in tweed chasing the public off private land for the protection of game for the landed gentry to shoot, or that of the image of a servant to the laird of the manor, as our dissenters would have people believe, is not, I feel, a true reflection of that part of our world these days. So this topic has come up before. I think we might have captured this slightly. We definitely touched upon it with Dylan Williams when he came on quite a while back. But this is the first time someone's actually sent this in.
Yes. Well, I mean, the other thing, Chris, is that I've actually written an article with broadly the same premise before now. And let me tell you, I got some heat from some gamekeepers off the back of that. They do not want to be called wildlife rangers, or at least some of them do not want to be called wildlife rangers. My article was suggesting, what would the alternative title be? And I think that's a very interesting question, because how do you capture everything that a gamekeeper is?
Ian, I think this is right up your street. What do you think about this topic?
I think it's a very interesting and timely question. If you go back to when I first joined GWCT, it was called GCT. It was called the Game Conservation Trust. I was entirely enthusiastic to see them change their name, and I thought then it was the right thing to do, and that's been confirmed. Not because of the sort of rather callow reasons that stop people don't shout at you quite so much, but because it actually reflected what was happening. So that if you look at partridges, for example, most of the research into partridge was about plants and insects. It wasn't about partridges. There's bits about predation and stuff, but most of it is about sawfly larvae and ants and God knows what. So, and you've got people working in that organisation who never picked up a gun, didn't mind shooting, but they were entomologists. I mean, the most violent thing they'd got was a butterfly net. And so it reflected reality. So the question is, does gamekeeper reflect the reality? Well, I don't think it actually does. And one of the things that drives me mad, really annoys me, is that years ago GWCT did the Otterburn study, which showed that a gamekeeper working on a piece of moorland drove up the productivity, the fledging success of lapwing and curlew and so on. And taking away the gamekeeper saw that collapse. The conservation industry has taken that and said, oh, well, we can do predator control, so we will do predator control. And so they do predator control. And when they do, it doesn't work. And one of the reasons for that is we didn't say predator control. We said a gamekeeper. And a gamekeeper is not predator control. A good gamekeeper, is the eyes and ears and brain and wits of the owner. A lot of estates, the person that is consulted more often than anybody else on that estate by the owner is the head keeper, who will say, well, and so even if you look at predator control, it's not just sending somebody out to kill foxes. It's about adjusting the environment, the landscape, to make it easier to control foxes and to make foxes less able to kill the things you want them to do, you want to protect. So beyond all peradventure, they are wildlife conservation sustainability managers, no question. That said, gamekeeper is a noble title. It goes back hundreds of years.
Yeah,
and if I was a gamekeeper, I'd be bloody proud of it. So I think that it's not about hiding who you are. It's about being clear about what you do. And so I'd perfectly understand if somebody owned an estate said, right, this is the job I'm advertising. It's game and wildlife manager. It's game and conservation. It's game and sustainability. So that's the way I'd go. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do, just like Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust.
I can't disagree with anything you've said. The only thing I'd add to this is that I did talk to a shoot not that long ago, I forget which one, where they had gone as far as changing the title of the keepers and their outfits. Now, the keepers weren't necessarily happy, and for the points that you raise, but they were wearing, say, like craghopper, waterproof stuff, looking like hikers, basically, walking boots that aren't necessarily screaming, I'm a keeper. And they were called wildlife rangers, I believe, George. And their feedback was that the attitude of the public to them since that change was enormously different. Suddenly, immediately wanting to understand what it was they were up to, the benefits, the birds they'd seen, everything that they actually really enjoyed talking about. So no different in terms of conservation, other than the fact that the perception of that person by the member of the public was entirely different. So it kind of shows what can be done. Now, if keepers are being put off coming into gamekeeping, and I don't know that, but there's obviously some clear reasons why they might be, that would suddenly change the game for them slightly, because they would be met with a different attitude. However, you've lost the historic argument that you quite rightly outlined.
Well, I don't think you have, because if you look at, that's perfectly manageable, because if you look at fox hunting in the days that it was still possible, hunt staff were always turned out immaculately: scarlet coat, top boots, cord breeches, everything. That was 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week from the start of the season right through to the end of March. But that was on hunting days, not every other day. On the other days, they got jeans, Wellingtons, a cow gown, a cloth cap, because that was their working clothes. So on the days that you were the huntsman, you dressed up in the traditional way. On the days that you weren't, you dressed like anybody else, you dressed like a farmer. And I think that that's well doable with shooting. I would be, well, as it is, I get dressed up to go shoot. I help to run a little shoot. So I go and feed, I go and, do a bit of predator control and stuff, help with the pens. When I do that, I'm dressed in just like a farmer. I've got jeans and Wellingtons and over trousers.
You're not in your +4s for dogging in.
Exactly. So you put your kit on a shooting day and you look smart, because that's what you're supposed to do. So I think there's ways. It's 2023. It's not cowardly or letting the side down to dress in a way which is practical on a working day. And when you're actually in the presence of the sport that we all love, then you dress properly for that too. So I think it's doable.
The other thing that I think needs to be said is that I wouldn't want a gamekeeper to look at this thinking, oh, but I'm now, what's the word? I'm sort of being looked down upon. I'm having to change my title to bend with the times, the rest of it. I think what we're trying to say here is that by changing your title, it better demonstrates the great work that you do. And actually, by calling yourself gamekeeper, sometimes you're underselling yourself, is what you're saying.
Yeah, hugely. Personally, I would not take the word game out of the title. I think that people think you're running for cover then. I'm very proud of game shooting and what it does and the people that are in it. So you want game in the title, but just like GWCT, it needs to reflect properly the enormous amount of work. Because if you were at, last time I saw you were on a moor, and that moor shoots 10 days a year.
Yeah.
So on those 10 days, what about the other 355? They're working their socks off, and all that activity gets more insects, more birds, more small mammals, all of that, and that's conservation. And to not get the credit for it, because You don't want to change your name. Seems a shame to me. But it's up to individuals. Everybody should make their own minds.
Game and conservation manager, then.
Yeah.
What did you get? Where did you get to with the article? What were you?
Well, so my argument was mostly around what the title should be, and it's hard to come up with something. I think in Europe they have foresters, which doesn't feel quite right, who do a very similar sort of game, sort of wildlife management sort of role. Wildlife manager sounds a bit, I don't know, managey. I can't remember what they have in the States. They sort of have enforcement officers or something quite military sounding. And I think I arrived at wildlife ranger being quite good, because ranger's got a bit of romance to it. But I think Ian's probably right that you probably need to whack in some conservation in there as well. And why would you remove game as well? So I didn't. The conclusion I arrived at back then was wildlife ranger, I think, from memory. But I quite like the idea of trying to keep game in there somehow. And I think there's always going to be some people who say, well, you can put whatever you want on my job title, but I think of myself as a gamekeeper, and that's how I'm going to, if somebody says, what do you do? I'm going to say I'm a gamekeeper. And I think that's absolutely fine. But I think, I'm sure you've come across this, Chris. I get asked quite frequently what it is that I do, and you have to sort of judge your response based on who you think you're talking to.
That's the key point. You're absolutely right there, and I think that needs to be said, because I change kind of a bit what I do depending on the audience, just because you want an easier life sometimes. So just do that. Have a backup
and it's
title.
hard. It's hard to argue with conservation ranger or something like that, isn't it? No one's going to say, "Oh, I don't like what you do," based on that. It's the immediate assumption of what gamekeeper means that I think we're potentially trying to combat here. And I think that I'm sure that there's plenty of gamekeepers out there who do something similar like this anyway. When they meet someone new. So I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it will take a long time to catch on. That's my feeling. But I think that the suggestion is eminently sensible. And I would like to see it happen.
Yeah. This is going to rumble on, this one. I really hope it does, actually. I think there's a lot to cover.
Well, I mean, if there's gamekeepers out there listening and they've got thoughts on this, I would really love to hear from a gamekeeper say, actually, this is how I feel about it. Because I completely get the romance and the history associated with the term gamekeeper. And I can understand wanting to, particularly if it's a generational thing as well. My grandfather was a keeper before me and all that stuff.
And it so often is. That's a real issue, because it so often is. And you feel like you're sort of letting the side down almost by shifting out of line. And I just don't think it should be seen like that. I think Ian's point is the most important one, which is, you do more than that. So let's make sure we shout from the rooftops about it.
Yeah, exactly. So are we saying not an unpopular opinion? Well, not with us anyway.
Not on this pod, and this is the deciding thing, isn't it? Therefore, it's unanimously popular. 100% of those surveyed agree that this should happen.
Well, yeah, like I say, I do want to know if anybody disagrees with us, because I do think it's an interesting debate. So drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. And if you're entertaining enough in your answer, we might read it out. But Bartholomew and Callum and Bob, and now, of course, Ian as well, are all members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters and will soon be in receipt of their very own set of the very exclusive and highly desirable Guns on Pegs podcast, Shooting Sock Garters. If you've got a shooting confession, quandary, or a query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or if you've got an unpopular opinion to share, or if you'd like to tell us about a forgotten drive, or you'd like to tell us that we're entirely wrong about the Gamekeeper Wildlife Ranger thing, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we use what you send us in any future episodes, you will get yourself a pair of garters.
Or come up to us at the game fair and tell us we're wrong there. And we'll have a chat about it.
Crikey, that's going to keep us busy, Chris.
Actually, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. Hey, we must talk about it. and we haven't really spoken about it. This is actually almost a live meeting now, very quickly.
Okay, fire away.
So, last year, Ian, we had this party, we've had quite a number of these, and they get bigger and bigger every year. Last year, I think it's fair to say, got slightly out of hand. Almost. It didn't quite, but it was verging on that. There must have been 1,000 people there.
I think that's a conservative estimate.
There's absolutely no way the area that we had been allocated for the event could even think about taking the number of people that decided they want to come to it. So we've had a chat with the Game Fair, and we're now not doing it there because they've seen what happens. We're doing it. We're doing it somewhere else. So it's going to be in the restaurant, which I think it's called Restaurant on the Hill. Anyway, you won't miss it. It's fairly central to the showground, and it's going to be on the Saturday night. So get that in your diaries first and foremost. If you're listening to the pod, you're welcome. We need some help, though. There's now too many people wanting to come to this party for us to try and even think about managing this ourselves. Now, we're gearing ourselves up with a few more members of staff, but it's quite difficult doing that when your main requirement is Saturday evening. It's quite a sort of short exercise. But more importantly, we really need help just to try and make it really fun. If you've, as ever, we mentioned a couple of years ago, if you've got things that you think you can do or stuff you want to bring along, or we must get this involved, or this guy's going to be there and he's got this and whatever, let us know, pod@gunsonpigs.com. We've already got a band sorted, you'll be pleased to hear. We're in the process of sorting all the drinks and the plan for that. And we're doing our live pod, George, aren't we? We don't know exactly when it is. We don't know when it is, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think probably on the Saturday afternoon, but I just need to confirm. The main thing is that we're going to be doing it in the Game Fair Theatre this year, which means we'll have a very snazzy PA system, and with any luck the whole thing will record properly this time because we'll have somebody who knows what they're doing pushing the buttons, and there'll be a lot more space. So watch this space for that. I think we should know by the next episode when that will be, but I'm really looking forward to that.
Indeed, and thanks to Charlie Jacoby, obviously, of Field Sports Channel, for lending us his kit to make it happen. It'd be a bit awkward if we don't invite him on for a little bit. Maybe we should just get him on for.
Well, I've already asked him to come on, and he said I will be so knackered from doing all the rest of it. It'll be quite nice not to have to be up there for a little while. So
okay, fair enough. Well, hey. Good. So yes, live pod will happen in the afternoon. It's going to be sort of 4 or 5 p.m, something like that, on Saturday afternoon. Parties in the evening. There will be some drinks. We'll get hold of some drinks, don't you worry. If you think you're deserving of some free drinks at the parties, the party's a paid bar, because obviously for 1,000 people, we can't just dip into our pockets and buy everyone drinks. But for parties, a paid bar. But if you think you're deserving of some drinks, let us know. We need your justification. I'm going to start off by saying that Bartholomew and his friend and their 2 other halves are deserving of some drinks, so they can have some. If you think you're deserving of some drinks, pod@gunsonpegs.com, send us in, give us your reasons, and if we think they're good enough, we'll add you to the list. I'm
actually pretty excited about it. The Game Fair is always hard work, but the party and the podcast, I think, make it for me.
Yeah. And it's actually almost become a tradition that we finish on a bit of Oasis at the end.
Yes, you love that, don't you?
Well, it happened 2 years in a row, so it's now a tradition as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, good.
Good. Right. Ian, keen to... I feel like we've got quite a few topics that we've actually kind of touched upon. The listener correspondence has been really interesting this week because it's very much in line with the things that we want to talk to you about. So let's go back right to the start. What got you into shooting in the first place?
I started to fish. There's a pond in the park just by where I live, and I'm a great reader. So I went to I was just old enough to go to the adult library, and I got all the books out of the Smethwick Library, which is, as I say, in the industrial women. But the person that did the purchasing for the Smethwick Library I would have loved to have met him, because he got some really strange books. He got Jock Scott's grease line fishing for salmon, I mean, you couldn't get further away from the bloody Severn River than that. And there was a Lonsdale Library book about fishing for ferox. And I mean, where did that come from? So I read all the fishing books, and I then started to read the books that had fishing in it and shooting in it. And then I read all the shooting books, in particular BB and all that lot. And I just was drawn to it. And then I read all of those and then started reading the hunting books. And so I then realised that by that time I was 16, that I hadn't got any money. I could fish, but I couldn't afford to shoot, and I couldn't get a gun. So I wrote to the British Field Sports Society and said, is there a pack of hounds anywhere near me I could go out with? And I used to catch the bus and the train and then walk to meets with the Warwickshire Beagles, and then started whipping in, and then eventually started hunting them. And then by that stage I met a lot of farmers, and the farmers shoot. And so you'd have a drink and after hunting and stuff, they should come and have a go. So they used to lend me a gun. Sometimes lend me a horse, but I mean, it was not simultaneously. And so I drifted into shooting like that.
It's fascinating.
That's not a normal way in.
No, it's not. And it's although oddly enough, my father shot, but only with a 2.2 rimfire. He was in his Boy Scout troop, won the British Empire Medal for small bore rifle shooting before the war. So, but I haven't taken after him at all. I mean, I've only ever used a rifle in anger once, but he was a good shot with a rifle. But it shows how the world has changed, that you would have a national competition for rifle shooting in the Boy Scouts. I don't think they do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like your route into working in field sports has been a bit unusual. I recently downloaded the audiobook of your book, Moorland Matters, and I'm only about a third of the way through so far. But one bit that I thought was very interesting early on was you describing yourself, your career in the Birmingham Authority as being the person who was prepared to take on all the sort of unwanted or unglamorous jobs. And I wonder if there's any parallel there in some of the causes you've chosen to hoist your flag for since then. I think it's very arguable that for example, the conservation of our uplands is an unglamorous, or at least for many an undesirable cause. Do you feel like there's something that you've taken away from that career in, I guess, civil service, isn't it, a public service, into your post-retirement career?
The first thing I spotted when I started hunting, and you started to meet people who were very rich or were aristocratic and stuff, and you met people who were farm workers and terrier men and stuff, is that the people who have the most fun are at the top and the bottom. The ones in the middle are always worrying about things. That if you've got nothing or you've got a lot, it's not a problem. So I think that's the first thing. So I'm very happy in the company of people who haven't got a bean. And when I was working with the city council, if you went to a public meeting, there was always somebody moaning about the bin men, and they hadn't done this and done that. When you actually did an annual survey of public opinion, the bin men got 99% satisfaction. And I worked with them, managed them for a bit. And that's because they actually do a bloody good job, and it's lost on people. So my experience of life in terms of working with people is that very often there's an enormous amount of intelligence and ability and stuff that's hidden in there. One of the chaps that was a relatively junior manager in street cleaning disappeared for 3 months. When he came back, I said, "Where you been?" And he said, "I've been tasking helicopters in Helmand," because he was in the TA. And they took it. And now he's running straight. So all my argument in life, and it's the same with defending shooting, and it was the thing that was ignored in hunting, is that don't worry about me. Don't worry about the chairman of this or the chief executive of that. Get the rank and file informed, get them wound up, get them fighting your corner, and you've got a chance of winning. So, and I love problem solving, and I love a lost cause, And more than anything else, I love an argument. I mean, I'll run across the road if I see somebody arguing. Excuse me, what are you arguing about? Oh, I know something about that. Can I have a go? So don't leave me out of this. So defending grouse shooting and grouse rule management is an absolute classic, because it's got the people that are being picked on are the people who actually are a community. If it says in the book, but I'll say it again, if you treated any other identifiable cultural minority the way they're being treated, if you spoke about them the way they're being spoken about, you'd be arrested. I mean, it's appalling. So true. And all the time, they're keeping these places. Well, Chris went and saw it. Where else would you see wader chicks virtually knee deep in the bally things? So, and it's tragic that they're being misrepresented. So I love defending them.
Was that what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that drives me mad is that these people are voiceless. That there's a new elite formed, in my view. So that if you take the people that run the RSPB, the board of the RSPB, and the board of Natural England, and the board of the National Trust, and you just moved them around, it wouldn't make any difference at all. They've all got the same assumptions. They've all got the same backgrounds, more or less. It's not identical, but they're pretty well. Same with the boards of the wildlife trusts and everything else. They're a self-perpetuating oligarchy that just says, oh, well, there are no gamekeepers, there are no farmers. You Google a wildlife trust board in a shooting area, and then find out how many farmers, landowners, gamekeepers, people that actually do stuff are on their board. I can tell you now, you won't find very many. Anyway, you'll find a few, and that's making a noble effort. But as a consequence, and then the media's largely the same, you've got, how can you find anybody that will give these people a voice? And that's what I tried to do. That's why each chapter starts with that quote from a gamekeeper or somebody similar, because they should have a voice. It's absolutely, well, the thing that makes me most angry when you look at a landscape like that with somebody from the conservation industry, they say, wouldn't it be interesting if, we planted it with trees or we stopped burning? Or no, it's not interesting. This is not a place that has no people in it. It's not a place that hasn't got value that you can just fiddle about with and then clear off back to London. This matters. It matters to the people that live here and the stuff that lives on it. So will you stop treating it like it's an interesting exercise? It's not. It's wrong.
And so for the media, it's a very easy narrative, isn't it? For the media to frame it as, rich toffos clad in tweed and swilling claret turn up and blat poor defenceless grouse, and for that people set fire to things and murder foxes and so on. It's a very easy narrative to tell. It's a much harder narrative for them to get their heads around if they're not familiar with it, but also harder to sell to their viewers or readers that actually this whole activity underpins an entire community, from the bloke who runs the pub to the people who turn out to go beating, and that without it, the glue for that community, especially in the cold, dark winter months, just vanishes. And true. Then from the conservation perspective as well, all that effort that goes in also vanishes. And as you said before, they go, oh, well, we'll do some predator control, but that's not the point as such.
That's right. And the problem is that it is an entity. It's interlinked. It's subtle and complex all at the same time. So you can't just pull a bit out. You can't just say, well, we'll stop driving and have walked up. You can't just say we'll stop burning. It's all interlinked, and it's the difficulty of having that conversation that makes comparisons so important. So it is necessary to say that if you take a fully functioning grouse moor, you compare it with something else. You compare it with a piece of land which is managed by a community. You compare it with a piece of land managed by the state. You compare it with a piece of land managed by an NGO. So at the moment, the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, the Peak District National Park, they're expressing very strong opinions about grouse moor management. But they own a grouse moor. They bought it. And that grouse moor, when they bought it, had black grouse on it. They're now extinct. It had loads of curlew, loads of lapwing, the data's all there, and they're gone. So will you please stop throwing? You're actually in a glass house. Please stop throwing stones. But you have to find a means by which that can be expressed. The other key thing, and I think it's a lesson we need to learn, is that with hunting, it was that the message in the defence of hunting was kept very tight. All the communication was done by paid professionals, by the MFHA, by Countryside Alliance, by the rank and file, the ordinary people that I loved were not allowed to say anything. They were kept back until the marches came. And then journalists were sent out to write stories from The Guardian, for God's sake, from The Independent and everybody else, to write stories about, isn't this pathetic? A load of toffs walking to make a fuss. Will they be wearing their scarlet coats? When they get there, the first person they walk alongside is the blacksmith from Moncrief. The second one is a nurse from Carmarthen. And they're not blood-sucking aristocrats. They're ordinary people who love what they know and do it because they love it. And it cuts out all this stuff. Why do you do this? Why? Because I love it. I can explain all sorts of reasons about shooting, why it's justified. But I do it because I love it. That's it. And the same applies to beaters. Beater gets paid 50 quid or 20 quid, whatever. When you get him in a corner and give him a pint, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'd pay to do it. It's the love of it that people don't get. And it should be front and centre, and it should be respected by other people.
So where are you hoping to get this to? So your latest role then is a step on from all of this. I think it's far. Is it far more public facing? I don't know. It feels far more at the forefront of campaigning almost than the roles that you've had in the past.
Well, I'm not sure yet. I should make it clear. I'm interim.
Right.
I said I'll do it till they get a proper grown up who can do things like sums and so on.
Good luck to that person.
Yeah. So, and you've got to remember there's 9 organisations, and they've all. The point of it really is to make sure that one of the points is to make sure they don't trip over each other and make sure that they all coordinate what they're doing. So I'm not clear what is possible yet, but we'll see.
And so I guess the first thing that landed on your plate must have been this GL43 business about releasing protected sites. Were you involved in the coordination of that, or are you involved in the ongoing legal case or anything like that?
No, well, the legal case has been run by BASC, and when everybody, Spike Butcher, who's the employed person, he was heavily involved in putting everything together and making it work. And I think we should be pleased that everybody's got together and reacted as quickly and as firmly as they have. We'll see, but it repeats itself. It's not just that one. That there is a tendency for people to, and I worked in the public sector, I know how it happens. You give somebody a job. I used to license taxis, So you give somebody a job, and then they go sick, and then, and then somebody comes along and they forget to consult because they weren't the person that was dealing with in the first place. I know all the reasons for it, but it has become endemic where the countryside is concerned. I mean, some of the things that go on with a regulator are just disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a shame you're interim in a way, because obviously the other thing you did, you've been on Bass Council. You're still on Bass Council? You were?
Yeah.
So like, you've got involvement and respect from all the organisations, which is just the sort of person
I've
that
got
we need in
involvement.
that.
I'm not sure about the respect. I mean,
Okay, well, I'll tell you, you've got respect. It's fine. So therefore, what do we need to do moving forward? Obviously, you've got an enormous wealth of knowledge behind you, all the stuff you've been talking about. What do we actually need to do? What are the key things do you feel over the next 2-3 years that we need to properly act on quickly to make the sort of change you're looking for?
The first thing is that we need to recognise that most of the people who are involved in running these things are, like me, relatively old and relatively white and relatively male. So that means we're not. You very kindly helped me get onto this event, you know. Well, it was a bit like helping an old person across the road, if you're honest, isn't it? You know, no, that don't click on that box, click on this box. So I'm out of my depth. I might be able to solve problems, but I can't solve that one. So I think in shooting, the other danger in shooting, and I heard it in hunting, is people start to say things like, it'll see me out. And that just makes me very angry, because I'm not doing this for me. I love shooting. I want it to survive for me, but I want it to survive. I want to be in my grave for 100 years and they're still shooting pheasants. I want there to still be grouse on the moors. So what you have to do, I think, is first of all, stop worrying about preaching to the converted. That book was partly to explain to people that grouse shoot or beat or are interested that there are answers to these questions. So if you take heather burning, people said, well, what's the difference? Wildfire, heather burning. It's burnt, isn't it? Well, actually, it's not. There's a long list of differences. It doesn't cost the state anything when you do it. You know, the atmospheric pollution's less. It doesn't burn the peat. It's designed to increase biodiversity as opposed to destroy it. It's a great big long list. So instead of when somebody says that to you in a pub, you go, well, I suppose so. You go, hang on a minute, mate. No. Dunk, 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 dunk. Even if you only remember half of them, he's back in his box. So my view is preaching to the converted is absolutely essential. And that's why I think that things like this are absolutely vital, because we assume that just because you've got a gun and you stand in a line of pheasant shoot, you know what's going on. You don't. And I think and then when people don't, we make the even worse assumption that they don't care. Well, of course they care. You haven't told them anything. You haven't given the opportunity. So I was talking to somebody, to Tarquin, funnily enough, and we were saying that why don't people set up days where you can have, say, a simulated game day, and then you can have some talks about how you run a pheasant shoot and what the conservation benefits are. Then you have a nice dinner, and then you have something in the morning, and then you all go home again. You pay for it, but it's been bloody good fun, and you've learned something. And then that keeps rolling out. You don't get the rank and file to start doing stuff, then it's going to be very expensive and probably impossible to do it another way.
So I think it's really important on that point. You just mentioned Tarquin Minniton Drake, who we had on the pod a few episodes ago. He organised this event, which you and I were very kindly invited to, up in the Lancashire Moors. And for me, so he actually called this event, it was similar to your book title, it was called Why Moorland Matters. And he had 3 different groups of people come and stay in this lodge on a grouse moor, which would usually be used for shooting parties during the season. And we basically went out, the objective of the event was to have a discussion amongst people that wouldn't all agree with each other. And we had some people that actually opposed to what we stand for. Objective event was to have discussion, but then also to go out and essentially a moorland safari. And it was absolutely fascinating. It's the first time I've been on a moor in spring. I've never been up on the moor in spring. I live in Kent. One of those things. It happens. I've not done it. I'm so pleased I've done it. And if anyone gets the opportunity, go and do it. It was incredible. And it made me appreciate so much of what we've just been saying. And it stirred for me a whole bunch of conversations about where this could get to. And I think that in terms of what you're saying about talking about preaching to the converted, but also having these conversations with others to try and find some middle ground for, well, where should we head to? It was absolutely brilliant. And there was a lot that came out of it. A lot of really interesting ideas. You and I actually talked about how to reframe the image of a grouse moor from a marketing point of view. and whether there's an angle there.
One of the extraordinary things was that people thought you ran a grouse moor for profit. That was when, so you said, no, they don't. They lose money. Well, they can't have an economic value. Well, of course they got an economic value. A man is pouring money into it, or 2 men or 3 men are pouring their own money into this, and that's money that's going into the local community. And the analogy I use is a football club. Nobody's surprised that as a rich man owns Manchester United or Manchester City or Liverpool. It's not going to be a sort of consortium of people from the checkout at Tesco's. It's an expensive thing. But the people that attend the football matches are very grateful that he spends the money, or often grateful he spends the money, because it gets them success. With a grouse moor, a person is spending hundreds of thousands of pounds keeping those lapwing there, keeping those curlews there, keeping the habitat perfect, keeping clean water and everything else, and keeping the community in existence, and it's not costing anybody anything. What's not to like?
Exactly. I mean, but this is exactly the same as the gamekeeper argument, in that they are doing so much more than what it says on the tin. Yeah. It's not a grouse moor. I was just thinking that. It's not a grouse moor at all. It happens to be that it's a moorland where there's some grouse. Just saying it's a grouse moor is it's wrong in every sense.
That's right. And I say that the best way to look at it is that grouse shooting is the backbone of that landscape, not the face of it. It can't be the face of it. It only takes place on a few days a year.
So the thing that I want to kick off the discussion of is something that we were chatting about together, which is this idea that if you reposition the name of the moor, so if you think of a moor that in your mind right now, and you changed it to say X Moor Conservation Project, that's what you called it. And you called it a not-for-profit organisation, because they're all not-for-profits, as we've said. You can't make a profit, especially with the weather we've got these days. It just doesn't happen. And then you do springtime moorland safaris for free for local people who want to attend, to show them what's happening. That's all you need to do during that time of year. For me, that would fundamentally change the public perception. It would mean the dog walkers keep their dogs in the lead a bit more and don't disrupt the chicks' nest and the eggs on the nest and the mothers and whatever. And I just think the whole approach to the keeper, to the moor, and by the way, don't worry, this is all paid for by the people that come to shoot the grouse surplus that we have. So don't worry, the car parking we weren't charged for in this event, it's on us. That fundamental change of perception by saying this is a conservation project rather than a grouse moor is something that I really think someone needs to look into.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. And I'd add to that it's even better if you can get adjacent estates to cooperate, coordinate, and to make it a bigger package, because then you get away from individual rich people and into things that can actually draw down money, which you need, which would be helpful to do the things that people don't think about. So why not have a shop in Middleton in Teesdale that tells the story of grouse shooting, or moorland management, or whatever it is, and get a grant from central government. RSPB gets grants from the Welsh government to do up its cafe and toilets in South Stack. Why don't you get that? So but you won't get it as long as you're an individual. Mr. Rich, Mrs. Very Rich. You get it if you're a landscape scale 12 estate thing involving all the tenant farmers, all the private land. But to that, it works.
I mean, I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of these conversations, but it's an absolutely fascinating perspective, and it's funny how those two, that bit of listener correspondence and that event that you guys have been on, the conversation that you were already having, have joined up. But I do think we have to wrap up, Chris. So as much as I'd love to continue this conversation for several hours, I think we'd probably better press on. So, Ian, the way we like to finish these episodes off is we ask all of our guests to imagine that the unthinkable has happened and that shooting, for whatever reason, is going to end. And you have the opportunity to put together your last ever perfect shooting experience. It's called Desert Island Shooting. The laws of physics don't apply. money is no object. You have the use, as we've discussed before with other guests, of the Guns on Pegs hyper-fast private jet / helicopter / time machine. You can go anywhere, do anything, be with anyone you like. What does your perfect last ever day look like?
It starts before dawn on the Ribble Estuary with a friend of mine called Chris Dickinson, whose knees are gone or his hips gone. So if you could just arrange for that to be sorted, we'd both be very pleased. And in October, and chasing pink-footed geese, there's a bag limit of 4, but Chris is so good at guiding me that as long as I can shoot straight, I can quite often get 4. We'd be off there by 9 o'clock on a good morning. So with a fast helicopter, I could be on a grouse moor to shoot October grouse, or rather shoot at October grouse, which would be nice. I mean, obviously, close to the Ribble are some very good grouse moors, as Chris knows. Then if there was any time left after that, I'd want a good duck flight, just as it got dark. Then I'd go to a pub called the Black Bull at Priest Hall for fish and chips. And then I'd go out with my friend Peter Taylor and another friend Peter Chomiak on his farm and shoot pink-footed geese under the moon. And that should get me to midnight. So that's what I'd do.
Wow.
And everything would be wild. Everything.
Yeah, exactly. But actually very doable.
Yes, it is actually doable.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's epic.
Yeah.
That's what's ridiculous. It's quite doable.
That's right.
You just need a generous invite on the grouse, otherwise you're
That's right.
fairly deep in the pockets.
And a friend with a friend with an actual helicopter.
Well, I don't know. Well, I reckon you could do that in the car.
Yeah, you could. You could do it in the car. You could, as long as you got the pinks early. October, you'd be, you'd want to.
That's the problem, isn't it?
But it is possible there, as long as you can hit them. So that would be
brilliant.
A fully wild day. That's cool. I don't know if we'd had a fully wild day. We must have done fishing and stalking, but anyway, fully wild.
Know what? We've done so many of these now. I can't remember them all. There was a point where I could reel them off, but I can't remember what everyone's chosen now. But I think that's one of the nicest ones. It's a very evocative picture.
Yeah. And I like that you dropped in the 2 specific mates as well. That's what it's about, because it's about the time you're having with that particular friend and enjoying those memories again. Yeah, very good.
But as far as the grouse shooting is concerned, I'm quite happy to go with anybody. Don't worry.
Yeah,
they don't have to be close personal friends.
That wasn't just for yourself then that day. There were actually other people there. Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ian. It's been fascinating. And like George said, we could go on for hours with some of those discussions. They were almost podcasts in their own right, just some of those topics.
Anytime. It's very kind of you to invite me.
Well, thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us. But as per usual, there is one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sharing your unpopular opinions or telling us about a forgotten drive. Drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode, we'll send you some garters. Also, remember that if you would like to be on our guest list and snaffle yourself a couple of drinks at Chris's expense at the game fair, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs and let us know why you think you're deserving. We will be back in a couple of weeks' time, but until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.